You know how you go to a cinema, and after the advertisements that you've paid to watch are over, you sit through several different identifying logos of various production companies, assuming you pay attention to them over the hollering and hooting of drugged up teenagers a few seats away. Ever notice how modern gaming is a bit like that too? Complete with the drugged up teenagers if you're going the multiplayer route, which I tend to avoid these days. What I'm trying to say is there's a load of unskippable logos and then even a splash screen that you have to enter a key command to bypass, like some glorified arcade or console title. Well, here's the thing, you'd expect me to say the old days are better at this juncture, but in all honesty, DOS games aren't immune to this either. Some of the biggest titles also had logos every time you executed them. Some of them were skippable, others weren't. Some of them were short, others were obnoxiously long because they reveled in the new multimedia technology. It's not a new problem, and the identifier is a form of branding that allows association. EA Sports, it's in the game. These days any advertisement is good advertisement. So no matter how bad or good a product is, you're getting hit with that logo and jingle. But back in the day, there was this mystical property in companies called quality assurance. Something so devoid in today's gaming landscape that you'd assume that Creed Bratton was in charge of it all. But back in the day, there were certain logos and names that were so synonymous with quality that they sold the games themselves. If you saw the name of Chris Sawyer, Sid Meier, or John Van Caneghem, that was it. You knew at the very worst it would be a good game, and it was more than likely going to be a masterpiece, because that's what these people did. The same thing happened with company logos. LucasArts, Sierra, Westwood, Blizzard, Interplay, Microprose, and countless others. The staff may have changed from title to title, but they had defining logos that served more as a seal of quality than a company advertisement. They wouldn't create it or publish it if it wasn't good. These were the sorts of companies that strung multiple games in a row together over the course of years that were all brilliant, cementing that reputation. What goes up must come down though, shattering the player's perception of quality. Whether it was financial issues or problems with the team or acts of God, something prevented them from making a good game and broke the streak. These days, the cart is put before the horse, and it's a Trojan horse at that. The advertisement is top-notch, the graphics are tremendous, the company is an established one that has put out great titles in the past, and the game isn't any good. Fool me once, shame on you, gamers across the world declare. Fool me years on end, shame on me and my wallet. There are huge games development studios standing astride this industry that initially got to where they were off the backs of a smaller team producing brilliant games, but subsequently haven't released anything good in years. There's a real too-big-to-fail attitude about them that's reminiscent of the banking industry. They're on a gravy train and they'll put out increasingly average or generic titles to keep that train going, because they've lost the spark that made them great in the first place, and they pump so much into advertising and branding that they don't actually need to make anything great now. Do you know what used to happen to companies who did that? Yep, they'd go out of business, because the audience who played their games didn't just accept whatever was thrown at them. Why not? Because there were so many other good options to turn to instead. There were loads of great big budget companies firing on all cylinders. The latest John Romero game wasn't any good. You still had Quake 3, Unreal Tournament, Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Sin, Elite Force, and countless other great games in the genre. Now, if the latest big budget AAA shooter isn't good, the budgets involved are so inflated that you've got maybe one or two alternatives tops. Otherwise, it's back to the games of the past, or the indie scene for something that isn't the same and has been spawned as an alternative. You know, like BattleBit Remastered. We got to sit and watch as an arms race unfolded between multiple companies trying to make their name. Now the names are largely made, and any new upstart trying to seize their crown will end up bought out after they reach a certain size, or all their staff will end up poached. It's not quite a monopoly in the AAA development world, but it's getting closer, and there have been calls to prevent certain billion-dollar acquisitions that have failed. I've talked about the motivation in previous videos because a lot of these earlier developers were flying by the seat of their pants, hoping that the next release wouldn't bankrupt them, but ultimately focusing on making a good game first and foremost, establishing their name, either with insiders as ones who could be trusted to deliver, or as a company or publisher of great games to outside investors and fans. And the most unfair thing about the past? All art appreciation is fickle. You could be a developer that produced nothing but good games and still end up bankrupt. masterpiece after masterpiece, and you get Van Gogh. The big companies picked up on this during their period of growth. They knew they would end up chewed up and spat out or unappreciated in their time. So how do you prevent this? By going even deeper down the rabbit hole and releasing even more out there stuff in the hopes that something you produce will be a mega hit? Well, you could do that, or you could do what you were doing before that spun a profit, and then do it again and again and again. EA Sports, it's in the game! That, in and of itself, is a form of consistency, where you make something that's decent and then repeat it ad nauseum, making minor changes along the way. A consistently 7 out of 10 game series with 10 out of 10 presentation and marketing will make money hand over fist, and is far more resilient in the marketplace than a developer chancing their arm each time with ideas and creativity in an effort to one-up themselves. It's exceptionally difficult to achieve the latter on a critical level, let alone a commercial one, says the man with over 600 episodes of the same show. I know a thing or two about doing the same thing over and over again. Geniuses don't grow on trees, and studios would often switch up development leads to keep things fresh. It wasn't always as simple as handing one galaxy-brained individual a clutch of artists and musicians and having them program the entire game themselves in assembly. Sid Meier and Bruce Shelley wrote the first Civilization game, but it was Brian Reynolds who designed the two best 4X games off the back of that, Civilization 2 and Alpha Centauri. In this increasingly unstable world, those who are happy to have a job in the industry need the security of still having that job. So 1,000 people doing workman-like material to keep themselves employed and keep the shareholders content with the continued growth is the form of consistency that has been chosen. This same mentality can be found whether you shift your attention to the mobile or independent markets too. There'll be a clutch of interesting games, and then the rest will be shameless copies with all the creativity of a gaming YouTuber. Occasionally a title will garner popularity, and before you know it there'll be hundreds of clones. Like that Fruit Ninja game, or Flappy Bird, or Vampire Survivors. When you know that people approve of you because of your adventurous spirit and willingness to push boundaries, and that the next title you put out could either make you a fortune or bankrupt you, it really separates the wheat from the proverbial chaff. Those who are willing to tap into their creativity and produce something the world hasn't seen before, versus the followers who observe their surroundings and choose to just emulate that, because they can't think outside of them. There are more games that are competent than ever before to go up against in the marketplace, but we're long past saturation point. That's a form of consistency, right? Just not the one people are genuinely looking for. Consistent competence is something you want in a supermarket worker, not the front line of your creative arts. Consistently pumping out 7 out of 10 games or sticking to a tried and tested formula with absolutely no deviation or flair is not what you want out of a AAA games company. Back in the day, the average game from the best developers was still way beyond the abilities of 99% of the marketplace, because their standards for what was good were much higher than their competitors. Hindsight looks at certain games from their catalogues and considers them all-time classics, when back in the day, they were considered rare missteps. Take The Dig as an example. It got a mixed reception from critics, but ultimately sold better than any other LucasArts adventure game at the time, thanks to its high-profile collaborations with George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Orson Scott Card, and Brian Moriarty. Fans who were used to Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle weren't that impressed by The Dig. They'd been utterly spoiled by an embarrassment of riches in the point-and-click adventure genre at the time, and this more serious and grandiose approach turned them off. Flash forward to now, and LucasArts adventure games dominate the list of best DOS games of all time, never mind best adventure games, and even The Dig is considered one of the greatest ever made. A retrospective analysis shows that because the high point of these developers' work was so high, anything that didn't reach or surpass those same heights wasn't actually bad, but also a classic that was just underappreciated in its time. Sure, not all DOS gaming developers were like that, but when you've scratched beyond the surface of this vast back catalogue, the same names will keep coming up attached to excellent titles, leading you down the Moby Games rabbit holes and into the growing realization that it was the consistent excellence of these developers that put those names on the map in the first place. And nowhere is this more prevalent than in the 90s. The peak of DOS gaming's many fruitful years.